What's up? Oh, I just realized this is live. What's up, gang? Thanks for joining the Undiplomatic Podcast, the show with undiplomatic takes about the foreign policy scene. I'm your host, Van Jackson. So I was planning to do this episode live. I thought I was behind the green screen, though, while the intro music was playing, and that's clearly not true. So I was grooving a little bit, but here we go. So I haven't done a live episode in a minute. Um, Mostly because I like to clean it up, throw in some musical transitions between segments and I don't know, pull out a little bit of the rambling every here and there. I don't do a lot of editing to this, obviously. If you're a listener of the show, you know that. But anyways, live is live. Here we go. Um, First up today, this is not really, it's not at the scroller on the bottom, but the Rand Corporation just announced an 11% staff reduction. And of all the people that I knew in the national security state, I'm not co-signing Rand, obviously, but like they are the think tank, the institution where I have the most like active national security friends. So the national security state bros and lady bros who did not police me out of their circles basically, most of them are at Rand, to be just totally candid. And so like there are a bunch of people I know, I mean like literally 7 8 people that I know personally who I'm not on bad terms with, who have been whatever they call it, furloughed, redundant, whatever, in this announced staff reduction. There's a way in which this is inevitable. There's a like it's getting harder and harder to do traditional sort of national security policy wonk shit without just making it like flagrantly pro MAGA and pro imperialist. So the space for that kind of like low key warmongering, like, sane washing your warmongering as like planning for the Taiwan scenario or some shit, or like we just think the Quad and AUKUS is really good. That's all. It's just we earnestly believe that. That the space for that kind of shit is shrinking rapidly. You're like, I'm not saying this as advice, trust me, but like the Elbridge Colby model, I think, is the future model for like foreign policy wonks who wanna keep serving the state no matter how evil the state is, right? The thing that made Bridge and I different from like so many of the other foreign policy wonks, I don't want to make this about Bridge, is that like we recognized, both of us, that there was a politics behind the policies that we advocated. The clear difference between us was that he wanted a reactionary kind of politics, and he recognized that a reactionary politics was served by the kinds of foreign policy things that he wanted to do, and the $1 trillion war machine and war planning for China, and like his single-minded obsession about China was good for his political class, his political milieu. So he took his policy nerd skills and then he put them in service of, you know, anti-LGBTQ shit, anti-labor union shit, straight up, anti-environment shit. He and then he like openly associated himself with MAGA, with the Capitol insurrection, right? And culminating in appearances at the National Conservative Conference and on Tucker Carlson, and that gets him fucking in. Like those things get him on JD Vance's radar, and then that gets him this number 3 policy job at the Pentagon, right? He was nakedly political even as he was doing his policy analysis, and you can call that evil if you want. Like I I disagree with what his politics were, but that is smart, even if it's in an evil way, right? And I kind of did the same, but I just took it in a different direction. My politics, peace, democracy, and equality, except not as abstract ideals, but things that we need to see in evidence as part of what we do in foreign policy. You know what I mean? So, anyways, I think that's the way. I think this like the fake nonpartisan pose that every think tanker does is a thing of the past. That's not going to protect you or save you from having to be a fucking MAGA loyalist, and you're gonna have to hold the bag on that shit and just own it. Or you're gonna fucking realize that this is not the way. You're gonna come on the peace train. You're going to advocate for foreign policies that align with populist positions, and you're going to fucking fight back to win democracy. You know, you half of you went to the No Kings protest, and good for you. What's a No Kings foreign policy look like? It don't look like Bidenomics, and it don't look like what fucking Trump is doing. You know, but sorry, I went off on a fucking tear there. The Rand, the reason I wanted to bring up the Rand Corporation thing, aside from the fact that it's like on my not on my mind, and I feel some type of way about people that I know getting affected by the choices of the state, which is a new kind of phenomenon. I talked about this in the last episode, but it used to be that if you were a foreign policy wonk, politics was something you read in the newspaper. It wasn't something that like happened to you. And that's totally fucking changing, dude. But the Rand thing is of a larger trend whereby academia itself in the United States has all this like downward pressure on it, and all of this like reactionary pressure on it. Some of it is under the guise of being anti-woke or whatever, but it's trying to steer the sites of social reproduction for the ruling class toward right-wing politics, just nakedly, right? Whereas, or in contrast to a higher education system in America that showed nominal, superficial deference to progressive values, but it didn't substantively. It was, DEI box checking or whatever. But it is what it is. It's better than where we're going. And I mention that because Harvard, which is I think the richest university in the world, they just announced massive cuts to dozens of its PhD programs. And the reason, literally, they, in their fucking press release, financial pressure. The world's richest education institution feeling financial pressure. So their science PhD admissions just got cut by more than 75%. The arts and humanities reduced by 60%. Social sciences between 50 and 70% cuts. History PhDs cutting funding by 60%. Biology, who needs biology? 75% cuts. Sociology PhDs dropped down to 0, right? And so this is, and I wrote in the newsletter recently about the Middlebury Institute for International Studies in Monterey, because it's like a place that's close to my heart, close to my own personal development. Monterey is a very special fucking place. But like that place is closing down too. And it's again for like these fiscal pressure reasons. Higher ed has been facing this fiscal cliff for a long time. And MAGA policy, Trump administration, is just like pushing them off the cliff. It's accelerating deep fiscal problems that were already there in like the business model of higher education. I would say, it's like it's most acute in America, but like this actually is a problem that's affecting fucking like everybody. Even in, New Zealand, Australia, there's downward pressure on university systems. But, and this to me, the question is why, and the question is why bringing it up in the context of this show. And the answer is that the crisis of capitalism is very real, dude. Very real. You can measure it in terms of the stagnation of global growth. That's the traditional way. And it's evident, it's empirical. Or you can also measure it in the turn toward financialization of the global economy, in speculation over investment, right? Which is what crypto is, which is what the AI bubble is, which is what stock trading is, and it's what fucking sports gambling is, right? This is the shit that happens every time capitalism gets into its crisis phase. The only question is whether we are in a terminal crisis this time, or whether it gets patched and muddled through somehow. But the fact of crisis is scary because it's always been, always, the working class who has to eat shit on the back of a financial crisis. Always. And it's the big institutions that get saved amid some of them, amid financial crisis. Always. So not great, And I'll talk about this more another day, but this crisis of capitalism is cannibalizing the technocratic class. That's what's happening in evidence at Harvard, at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, at the fucking Rand Corporation, right? And I'll talk about this more another day, but this crisis of capitalism thing, it's cannibalizing the technocratic class. I just have to reiterate that, right? What will remain of this class, the class I basically am now, right? What's going to remain of it is going to be blind loyalists to oligarchs, to ethno-nationalists, to imperialism. It's going to be like quote unquote patriotic education. That's the fucking future of this shit, right? Bleak as fuck. And you can see the canary in the coal mine. It's happening now. It's happening now. 11% staff reductions at Rand Corporation. Of all the places that are going to get cut, they should be more insulated because the American economy is comprised entirely of fucking AI and sports gambling and war making. The national security state is the center, the beating heart of the American economy. So you'd think that like a defense think tank that is has unique government status and access should be fucking good as gold in the era of like national security imperialism, but it ain't. So troubled times. All right. Well, next segment, I might have to edit this. Throw in some fucking transition music or something when I release the audio version of this. But for the live version, I wanted to talk about briefly Steve Bannon's musings about Trump 2028. So this is very troubling. Let me just see if I can share the clip here.
Well, he's going to get a third term. So Trump 28, Trump is going to be president 28, and people just ought to get accommodated with that.
So what about the 22nd Amendment?
There's many different alternatives. At the appropriate time, we'll lay out what the plan is, but there's a plan, and President Trump will be the president in 28. We had longer odds in 16 and longer odds in 24 than we got in 28. And President Trump will be the president of the United States, and the country needs him to be president of the United States. We have to finish what we started. And the way we finish it through Trump. Trump is a vehicle. I know this will drive you guys crazy, but he's a vehicle of divine providence. He's an instrument. He's very imperfect. He's not churchy, not particularly religious, but he's an instrument of divine will. And you can tell this of how he's pulled this off. We need him for at least one more term, right? And he'll get that in 28.
You're not driving me crazy. I'm trying to understand the coherence of the things you've just told me in the last few minutes. On the one hand, you've said the Constitution is fit for purpose. Secondly, you've said that President Trump needs another term, even though the 22nd Amendment makes pretty clear that he cannot have another term.
Why does it make that clear?
Because he's on his second term already.
At some point in time, we will make sure we go through Zanny and define all those terms.
But even if you find a way to undermine
you
will be undermining the spirit of that amendment, even if you find some way around it. And to those
Can the American people, if the American people, with the mechanisms we have, put Trump back in office, are the American people tearing up the Constitution? Would that be tearing up?
Well,
would the American people be going against the spirit of the Constitution, ma'am?
I think yes, actually, because I think what you will end up with is a populist justification for a quasi-dictatorship.
That's not true at all. Trump.
That's what it sounds like.
It's not. Trump is a dictatorship. Did you just see the compromises he had to make on the big beautiful bill? You see the compromises he has to do on
with
everything,
Republicans,
accommodating Zelensky on what President Trump is nothing but a series of negotiations to kind of keep this thing rolling forward, where he's having trade-offs all the time.
Steve, you've just spent the last 20 minutes telling me we have to smash the other side. There's no room for debate. There's no room for compromise. We must smash them. And now you're telling me this is a negotiation. I mean, that's
no.
I guess that's why it seems to me some kind of tension
First
there.
off, the only way President Trump wins in 2028 and continues to stay in office is by the will of the American people. Okay? And the will of the American people is what the Constitution embodies. And so I think we're going to be in good hands there. We need to finish what we started. And President Trump is the instrument, a providential instrument to finish that, to finish this.
Okay. This is this should be scary stuff to you. The thing that's important to know is that when somebody like Steve Bannon talks about the will of the people, he also thinks of himself. He's on the record saying this. He is a self-styled Leninist. And for people who don't track this shit, to be a Leninist is to think of yourself as an elite or a vanguard who wields power, who takes power, who uses the state to do what you think is in the interests of the quote unquote people. What do you mean by people? Well, I think Bannon means white dudes, or white Christian dudes specifically. But regardless of what his image of the people is, when he talks about like invoking the people or the will of the people, he's using that as a rubber stamp to basically say, we're going to do what we're going to do, right? So what's going to materialize is going to look like what's her name? Fucking Zadie Minton Beddoes or whatever. She's going to be like, look, this looks like a fucking dictatorship, dude. This is dictatorship. What about all these executive orders is not dictatorship? What about sending the military in all of these democratically held cities is not a dictatorship? What about prosecuting your political enemies is not a dictatorship? And then Steve Bannon says to that, it's the will of the people, therefore it's not a dictatorship. This is fucking, you cannot like reason with a kind of like fascist brain like this, other than that, like this whole Leninist thing, I wanted to mention that I don't have a ton to say about this beyond that. Like a Trump third term is blatantly unconstitutional. You heard Steve Bannon right there say specifically, okay, we're going to start with the premise, the outcome that Trump runs for a third term, and we're going to work backwards for how to justify it. So rules don't matter except to the extent that they serve your power. He's saying it. He's saying it in a slightly sweet way that maybe a centrist or a nonpartisan person it will just gloss over them or something. But that's what he's saying, right? And in any other moment in history, this whole idea of like Trump 2028, because of its flagrant unconstitutionality, it's the kind of statement that would have been a crossing the Rubicon, moment for fascism or authoritarianism or whatever you want to call it. But we have crossed so many fucking Rubicons. There's nothing left to cross. All the Rubicons done been crossed, And there's a way in which this does go back to like, the Gaza genocide, even BLM in 2020, the uprisings, right? Like when you let the worst kinds of injustice imaginable just slide, like when you can't be bothered to mobilize for the worst crimes against humanity, anything gets through, right? I've said that many times. I got it from Naomi Klein, but it's true, In that case, you can't mobilize for shit, including violations of process, including violations of the Constitution, Now, I don't think Trump will be alive in 2028. He's profoundly unhealthy, and that's kind of if there's something interesting here other than like another Rubicon moment, the interesting thing is that like Bannon is saying how crucial Trump the person is to the cohesion of the right and the far right, to this uneasy MAGA coalition, being able to keep that all together and to be able to claim that it's functioning on behalf of the will of the people. So far, that really does rely on specifically Trump the man himself. And so Bannon and everything he represents cannot afford to have Trump just disappear from the scene. So they need him to both not kick the bucket, but also to run in 2028, to win in 2028, or to suspend elections so that past 2028, it doesn't matter. He's just still in charge, you know? So this is where we are. It's just interesting to have Bannon in his own words explaining all of this. You know, you can't deny, you can't claim you didn't know, I guess, at a minimum, right? All right, time for a sip of coffee. Next segment. The CIA rethinking China or not, right? So there's a new investigative reporter who just started a new newsletter Substack called Capital and Empire. She's very good. She had this story. She had a couple sources for non-attribution saying, quote, the CIA is now considering dissolving its China Mission Center, according to two sources familiar with the matter, as part of a broader realignment that de-emphasizes confrontation with China. The CIA has about a dozen mission centers that cover functional houses, blah, blah, blah. In 2021, the Biden administration launched the China Mission Center, the only one devoted to a single country. Sources say that the CIA is thinking about shutting down the China Center, in part for its ineffectiveness, having consumed vast resources with little to show for it. So this is an interesting story because I think it's being marketed as like, here's yet another indicator that US foreign policy is pivoting away from great power competition, which I would say, like, thank God, if so. Or like, it's not focusing on China anymore. It's not prioritizing this, like, we must beat China at all costs, you know, vision. I think that's still not true. And I think there's actually not a lot at stake here. I think if the CIA dissolves the China, in the book I wrote with Mike Brennis on my shoulder, The Rivalry Peril, right? We criticized the China Mission Center for being bloated, extremely expensive, and for, you know, basically being guilty or complicit in perpetuating a kind of group think. You know, it operates like this idea that you need a bunch of China language analysts and you need people reading the fucking Politburo documents and stuff, and like everybody should be studying Mandarin. That's not worth a damn. And it is in fact harmful if the premise of everybody who's reading the Mandarin documents is China hawk warmonger shit that offloads all of our problems as things that China fucking is doing to us, that China is fucking evil. If those are your premises as you parse Xi Jinping's speeches in Mandarin, then knowing Mandarin isn't helping you understand China any better. You're just using what technocratic knowledge you have to reinforce your priors about the evil of this fucking other great power. And who benefits from that, right? Not most Americans. Incidentally, not most Chinese either, but not most Americans, right? So if the China Mission Center, which shouldn't have been created in the first place, if it sort of goes the way of the dodo, I don't think there's much at stake there, because there's still East Asia and Pacific Mission Center at the CIA. And you better believe they're going to fucking cover China. You know what I mean? So it's not like the China expertise is going to go away. But also the China expertise doesn't have anything to show for itself. How has the world been made more secure, or Americans been made more secure as a result of all the national security spending we've done on China? I'll wait. Oh, nothing. Yeah, fucking nothing. We haven't benefited from all of this China fetish shit, from the national securitization of fucking everything. Nobody benefits from that except for the fucking tech oligarchs and the national security bros and people at the Rand Corporation who are benefiting less and less from it, right? So the technocratic class is getting squeezed. The oligarch class is still making that fucking money, you know? So, this actually, I have this here. The CTO at Palantir, the chief technology officer, right? Palantir, one of the most ghoulish anti-China defense tech, death tech firms in Silicon Valley, also the most profitable. The CTO for Palantir said last week, fucking last week, we are in an undeclared state of emergency. America's adversaries are circling, and the American industrial base that dominated the 20th century is dormant. For the CCP, it is not enough for China to prosper. America must fall. America must fall, dude. They are actual warmongers, right? And this is the thing. Like, if you were one of the few people who benefits materially, financially from the $1 trillion war machine, you end up saying shit like this. 100%. Kind of makes sense. Follow the money, right? The only people benefiting from great power competition with China are ghouls like this fucking Palantir guy, right? And they're the fucking jingos. They're the ones ringing the ethno-nationalist bell so that we keep funding the $1 trillion war machine at the expense of literally everything else. The reason your fucking bread and eggs and gas and electricity costs so much, the reason why you can't fucking buy a home, all like no matter what your brand of precarity is as an American, it owes something to the fact that we see fit as a state to make our economy dependent on national security spending. The $1 trillion war machine is why your life fucking sucks. Okay? Gotta fucking get that through. And so the demagogues, like the Palantir guy, are a fucking genuine threat to democracy. They're obviously a threat to peace, but they're also taking money out of your goddamn pocket, man. You know? So, anyways, as long as this system remains oligarchic and as long as there's this cream at the top, this like very, very tiny ruling class that's sucking up the resources of society, as long as that exists, you ain't gonna have nice things, for one thing. But also, we're still gonna have the $1 trillion war machine. And to have the $1 trillion war machine, you have to be planning for the big one against China, because all of this circle jerk imperialism in Latin America is not enough to justify what we do and spend on the China threat. Palantir can make some money off of Latin America. Anduril can make some money off of, drones and shit for Latin America. But it's China that is the golden goose for the death tech class, right? And so, as long as that remains true, and it clearly remains true right now, the national defense strategy, which I'll talk about another day, it's still pending. It hasn't been released yet, but this whole thing of like hemispheric focus, Latin America focus, you know, that is way overplayed. Abandoning the China threat problem, blah blah blah. That's way overplayed because the military industrial complex, the $1 trillion war machine, it still depends on this China boogeyman shit. And that's why this Palantir quote about the CCP is insistent on making America fall and die or whatever. He said that last week. So yeah, the CIA is contemplating getting rid of its mission center on China. And maybe if the national defense strategy de-emphasizes China, maybe the CIA will feel justified in cutting some expenses by getting rid of this center that should not have existed in the first place. But that doesn't change anything. You can say that's not great power competition, but what it is demobilizing some of those resources that were being poured stupidly, dangerously into one particular version of great power competition, the version that we should all be repudiating. And so it drives me crazy when I see sort of like left liberal organizations like National Security Action, no shade if you happen to work for them, but they're fucking always trying to out hawk Trump on China. And it's like, oh, he's not doing great power competition smartly. Biden wasn't doing great power competition smartly. What the fuck are you talking about? Nobody in Washington has been doing great power competition smartly. I wrote a book about it. The Rivalry Peril, right? So anyways, fucking it's interesting. It's a data point that the CIA is maybe rethinking how much resources it plows into the China problem. But I mean, CIA, this might surprise you. They're basically a bunch of fucking bad guys. We tortured some folks. We cooed some folks. We droned some folks. They focus on China a little more, a little less. They're still doing all that shit, right? So, anyways, there's another story. It's kind of a China-themed episode in a way, but the China decoupling thing is kind of an adjacent story, right? So there were a bunch of reports just in the last 48 hours that the Trump administration is considering a plan to restrict globally produced exports to China made with or containing US software. So, I mean, we're talking about like the US export control regime. I talked about this in the last episode, has massively expanded as of September 29th, right? This BIS bullshit. But now the Trump administration is also contemplating new export controls under, that would basically apply to everything to China, right? Literally a wide range of goods, quote unquote. And in Trump's own language, I didn't bring up the tweet, but in his own language, he was like, anything that we don't rely on from China or that we can produce ourselves, we're cutting China off. Even if we were, I know it's like, even if we rely on China for it, as long as we can produce it ourselves, import substitution, then we're going to cut China off. So why is this significant? I hope it's on one level, I hope it's obvious, but like there is a school of thought that says the US will not and cannot and is not decoupling from China. Like the people who say that, they will say like, yes, there is a policy of economic containment more or less in place since the Biden years. Yes, export control restrictions are growing and growing and growing, but no, decoupling can't happen. That is obviously wishful thinking, right? It's like saying World War I can't happen because globalization, right? It's true that decoupling is a kind of economic suicide. It would be irrational for America's ruling class to undertake a project like that. Suicidal for the US, the national economy. But that's kind of what's been happening. This whole Trump administration has been a sustained siege of the national economy, right? And that kind of reveals something. It reveals that there is no national economy to speak of in a meaningful sense, right? There are oligarchs who benefit from state power and from public policy created by the Congress and by executive order. And then there's everyone else who has to survive in whatever conditions get created by allowing oligarchs to secure the bag with the power of the state on their side. But like, why would you call that aggregation a national economy, quote unquote? That's like, you can want to have a national economy. You can have a bet or a wager or a personal belief that the national economy is the way, that it's going to be what provides for most of us. But that's not what's happening. That's not reality. The reality is you have a ruling class and you have a working class, and it's the working class that's getting soaked so that the ruling class can extract more profits at a time of declining growth and seemingly declining productivity now too. And everyone else has to take it in the ass. And that's just how it is, right? Um, and like I saw, God, do I have it here? No, I don't. I was gonna say, like, you might have missed it, but last week, the CEO of NVIDIA, the chip maker, right? They are the company that has received some of the largest subsidies from the Chips and Science Act, which is to say, they are one of the biggest beneficiaries of great power competition with China so far in the way that the Biden administration did it, right? Despite that, the CEO of NVIDIA said that there was a conference last week that Biden's chip export controls on China were one of the most self-destructive decisions ever taken by the US government. He said it caused NVIDIA to go from 95% market share in China to zero. It was a huge setback to AI innovation in America and a huge acceleration of AI innovation in China. And I bring that up because the Trump administration is, and I warned about this in 2024. I wrote like a bunch of shit about the way that decoupling was super important to the far right, China decoupling, right? It was something that they had said they were going to do, and everyone was acting like that was not a serious threat, right? And I bring it up because Trump is actively considering full decoupling from China. The Financial Times had a headline saying exactly that. Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, said, "We don't seek decoupling from China, but we will if China doesn't reverse its export controls, whatever." So it's like saying we don't seek war, but we'll still do war. It's the same shit, right? So decoupling is like on the table and it's actively happening. And Trump is positioned himself because everyone else is so fucking stupid. He's positioned himself as the only guy who can stand in the breach and prevent full decoupling. And that makes the American business community totally dependent on him, right? And so we've all sort of contributed, not fucking me, Washington and how everybody operates and this whole great power competition bullshit has created to a situation that super empowers Trump as the guy who can stand there and prevent decoupling or keep making it happen. It's a secular trend. It is happening, but he can take it all the way, in which case Palantir gets paid, or he can take it no further, or he can allow for a kind of corrupt, gilded detente with China, where oligarchs on both sides kind of profit from this, and then nobody else matters. End of story, right? So, I don't know, man. I don't know. Like if decoupling happens in a real way, and that's not just being implemented, it's being partial, it's being threatened actively. If that goes through or it continues to accelerate, we're talking in the near term about a global recession, I think, which there are some signs of that already, and that's pretty fucking depressing. But it would also accelerate the isolation of the US from the capitalist world system, like as this thing apart, like America would basically be part of like an imperialist economy that's capitalistic within its own sort of firewall, but then it's like cutting itself off from the rest of the world system, which is complete mind fuck, And the thing that drives me many things drive me crazy about this, but like one of them is that like US allies are totally aloof of all of this and they're not really taking any of it seriously enough. The Guardian fucking reported 3 days ago, 4 days ago, that in the last 6 months, 29 Americans have applied for political asylum in Australia. And I find that kind of funny. Like I know it's all very serious. It's just like so hard to wrap my mind around, I like when I moved to New Zealand in 2017, I used to joke that I was a political refugee, but it was a fucking joke. Like, I mean, now it's like this is really happening. You know, it's like the justification in the application, like it's that they're being exposed to forms of terror and oppression and being denied equal rights, which is obviously the case. Depending on what category of person you are in America, you are definitely denied equal rights. So there is a case for political asylum. Australia is having to process more and more of these applications. You better believe the stack's going to keep growing. And at the same time, the Australian government is doubling down on its dependency on its imperial master. There's this weird unthinkingness. There's a weird conservatism, imperialist conservatism, even in the fucking Labour government in Australia. It makes no sense. Like the Australian national security state, the national security states of every US ally, they're not thinking clearly. They're not managing their role in the world responsibly. They're not even looking after the interests of their people. They're just loving having meetings with White House officials, jerking off to it, fucking posting pictures of it on Twitter. You know, like what are we doing here? What are we doing here? To continue the what are we doing here trend, I'm going to pivot a little bit from China for a minute, and I wanted to talk about Graham Platner, the guy running for Senate in Maine. He's famously a Marine. He um, is an oysterman, you know, like basically the equivalent of a Maine farmer. And he's also an economic populist who's against war and against imperialism and against genocide, right? So he checks all the boxes, and these aren't just like identitarian boxes. He actually has like chapter and verse the policies that Bernie advocated for. He is like a true champion of the working class. But as you might have heard, and as I've been getting it both barrels online, and my co-host of my other show, Lyle Rubin, he's been getting it both barrels as well. He even got named in a bunch of like Jewish press articles. But Graham Platner had a tattoo on his fucking nipple that was like a sort of blurry skull and crossbones, and it resembled a skull and crossbones symbol that the Nazis used to use, right? And people fucking lost their minds about this. How do we know about this? We know about this because of Oppo research. There was an Oppo dump, right? It was opposition. So he's running for Maine. He's an economic populist. He's challenging the sort of centrism of the Democratic Party. And there is a centrist candidate who's now running against him, Janet Mills. He's trying to unseat a center-right Republican in Maine at Senator Susan Collins, who's a fucking horrible politician, you know? And so he's been building an immense amount of momentum. He's incredibly popular. I fucking love the guy from everything that I know about him, you know? And my co-host of the other show, Bang Bang, Lyle, he also fucking loves the guy. And it's not hard to see why when you look at what he's advocating for and what he says and what his politics are about. But certain people, his opposition, his Oppo research people, but also like certain leftists are fucking going hard in the paint on this guy, as if they expect like the guy who's going to run for Senate to be Jesus or something. And I find this to be totally fucking ridiculous. So like people are trying to like cancel him and shit over this tattoo. And so I just wanted to play. It's nuts. It's fucking bananas, you know? And I'll say, Lyle and I talked about this last night, actually. Marines are dumbasses. People who bros in the military are fucking dumbasses. I was a dumbass. Lyle was a dumbass. Most Americans, I'm sorry to say, are fucking dumbasses. In a democracy, you have to have people who are represented by their representatives. Members of Congress are supposed to be representatives. If they are not like the people that they represent, why should we expect that they're going to represent those interests of the people they represent, right? And I say that because, like, I recognize the kind of person this guy was, and in a little bit, I was this guy, Graham Platner, and I see an evolution that happened. This guy has a story arc. You know, he is the guy who could have been a fucking fascist. He could be working for ICE. He could still be working for Blackwater. And he decided to go another way. He decided that his true ops is the oligarchs. And that is why there's so much money and effort behind trying to defeat him. So, and I should also say, Lyle mentioned this too yesterday. Most people who get tattoos, especially Marines, don't fucking know what the tattoos mean. And that's what Graham says happened. He's like, I was drunk and I saw a fucking cool tattoo. And I was like, let me get that. That's how it always works. You don't cross reference it with fucking, Nazi genealogy shit. So like, why I feel like you've got to give him the benefit of the doubt, especially because everything about his politics now is explicitly anti-fascist. He is the strongest anti-fascist champion of like anybody running right now, as far as I can tell. But people want to hang him over this choice that he made when he was a different person and he was a fucking dumbass, you know? So anyways, here's Graham in his own words talking about this.
Hey everyone, Graham Platner here. I want to talk to you about something. In 2007, when I was a young infantry sergeant in the Marine Corps, myself and some machine gunners I served in Fallujah and Ramadi with were on our third deployment. We were in a naval vessel and we pulled in for a Liberty port in Split, Croatia. We went ashore to do the thing that young Marines do, which tends to be carousing and sometimes getting tattoos.
What the fuck
We wanted to get
means,
something that represented our jobs, our service, fighting in Fallujah and Ramadi as machine gunners. We went ashore, we found a tattoo parlor after a fair amount of heavy carousing, and we found a tattoo on the wall, a piece of flash that looked like a terrifying skull and crossbones. We thought it looked cool, and so we got it. I have had this tattoo for the last 18 years. I re-enlisted into the United States Army with this tattoo, where I was screened for hate and gang-related tattoos. I worked for the State Department as a contractor, where I got a full physical, which included screening my tattoos. I've gone through life with this thing, taking my shirt off, having photographs taken, videos taken. I've been very, very open in my life with the fact that I had a skull and crossbones on my chest, because that's what I thought it was. It's come to my attention that it has a stark resemblance to a symbol that is used by neo-Nazis. And I want to say that was not the intent at all. And the idea that I've been going around with something like that utterly horrifies me. I know that symbols like this can be incredibly damaging to people, and the idea that I've had it all these years and it could have been read like that is incredibly troubling. I have lived a life dedicated to anti-fascism, anti-racism, and anti-Nazism. I think that racism and anti-Semitism are a long scourge on our society and a long scourge on our politics, and I think it has no place in our world. For that reason, I have gone and gotten it covered up. Last night, I went to a tattoo parlor, and I got this to cover up the skull and crossbones. It's a Celtic knot with some imagery around dogs, because my wife Amy and I have two wonderful dogs that we love a lot. This far more represents who I am now than even the skull and crossbones did, which I thought that it was. This has come up because the establishment is trying to throw everything it can at me. It is terrified of what we are trying to build here. Every second we spend talking about a tattoo I got in the Marine Corps is a second we don't talk about Medicare for all. It's a second that we don't talk about raising taxes on the wealthy. It's a second we're not talking about the material struggles of Mainers as they try to scrape through a system that at its core is trying to rob them. And that's why tonight, I'm just going back right out on the road. We're holding a town hall in Ogunquit, where much like I've been doing for the past month, going around the state of Maine, making myself accessible to Mainers in their community.
All right. You get it. All right. He apologized. He has a story that explains why it's not what we think it is. He tells what his real politics are, and he changed it. He took this permanent thing and put a new permanent thing on top of it. What the fuck are we talking about? Why are we talking about this? You know what I mean? We're talking about this because it was part of an oppo dump, because half of the country is victims of fucking political manipulation, you know? Um, and when Lyle and I were talking about this yesterday, we both thought that this entire tattoo gate was going to make him more appealing, more popular. Because if you're a fucking oysterman, or you're just humping the graveyard shift, or you're just trying to get by, like if you are actually part of the American working class, which is most people, you don't give a flying fuck about what people are doing on their personal time. You don't give a flying fuck about what kind of ink is on their fucking nipple. Doesn't fucking matter, dude. What matters is, like, are you going to help make our lives suck less? Are you going to be complicit in a goddamn genocide? Or are you going to fucking pose, preen, try to claim moral superiority about Nazi shit while supporting a genocide? You sick fucks. Anyways, well, polling is in. Lyle and I, last night, we were saying this, like, oh, this whole tattoo thing, the elites are so out of touch, they don't realize that this is not a reason to cancel him. This is why he's going to get elected, you know? And proof is in the pudding. Just this morning, there's a poll out in Maine that shows Graham Platner is polling at 58%. And the next closest candidate for the primary, Janet Mills, his centrist op, she's polling at 24%. He's kicking fucking ass in light of Tattoo Gate. So everybody, shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. If you're about this show, if you're anywhere adjacent to my politics, I get that not everybody is. But if you think that oligarchy is a problem in this world, and most people do, that's in the polls too, class war is going to require recruiting people from the working class, from the warrior class, period. We can do that by embracing them when they've had a change of heart, and when they've embraced our politics, when they've decided to be anti-fascist, when they've decided to embrace peace, democracy, and equality. We can get on board with them and forgive them of their past. Or we can do the shit that the Ezra Klein things, which is like throw trans people under the bus and become reactionaries ourselves, and try to appeal to the warrior class by being fucking reactionaries ourselves. We can beat fascism by being fascist adjacent, you know. That's fucking nuts. That's nuts. What are we talking about here? So anyways, shout out to Graham Platner. Final story, this just came across my desk. So a group of 15 NGOs, progressive organizations, think tanks signed, they're not all progressive, but like they are mostly anti-war, and they just sent an open letter to Trump directly, which does not happen very often. And they are trying to, ahead of Trump meeting with Xi Jinping, which is happening imminently. They're trying to like sell Trump on reducing military tensions with China, and like convince him that yes, there is a constituency for this. So make nice with China, and you're going to have some people back home cheering your name, right? That's kind of what's going on here. And so the letter itself, I didn't detect anything wrong with it. I mean, let me read it or share a couple parts of it here real quick. Can we see this? Yeah. So as you engage in this final trade agreement with China, tariffs, blah, blah, blah. The U.S. They're criticizing the quote, the U.S. drift from the longstanding one China policy alongside escalating military signaling around Taiwan and the South China Sea. Reducing military and geopolitical tensions is not a concession. It is a practical prerequisite to diplomacy that can help deliver concrete economic gains for American workers. This is true, 100%, right? The one China framework, right? Recognizing China as the sole legal government of China, blah, blah, blah. We all know about this history. It helped prevent war across the Taiwan Strait. Successive administrations have upheld quote unquote strategic ambiguity as part of this, right? Nancy Pelosi, Biden administration fucked it up, blah, blah, blah. Where's the other part here? Yeah, we have deviated from the one China formula. We need to get back to it. The Pentagon has continued going in this direction of, militarism and jingoism. It maligned China's intentions and sowed fear of a quote unquote imminent war. Of course it has. That's what that 2027 rhetoric was all about. It's pressured allies to expand their militaries. Yes, it has. And it made clear commitments to defend Taiwan in the event of war. These steps may be described by some in Washington as deterrence, quote unquote, but in practice, they heighten a classic security dilemma. Each side's moves to ostensibly prevent war look like preparations for war to the other, spurring further militarization and hardening positions at the bargaining table as well as the Taiwan Strait. So that's where we at here. That's the gist of the letter. I find it not only inoffensive, I find it smart. I agree with this. My colleagues at the Center for International Policy, I know, agree with this. My colleagues at this organization, Security and Context, they agree with this, I know. And that's actually the curious thing about this. This seems to be a very tiny effort. The only troubling thing is that it's 15 organizations, the and the organizations that I am affiliated with are not on the list, right? CIP, Security and Context, they're not on this. And I know, I'm confident, I can't say 100%, but I'm confident that they would be on this list if they were approached. I have a hard time believing that they were approached and they declined to sign this letter. This is like, I should say, some of the language in this letter is verbatim copy and paste from my writing. Okay. I don't have a monopoly on it. I'm not trying to take credit for this because I wasn't involved in this letter. But like, this is, and I want people to use my language, frankly, but my point is that there are constituencies who support this because I'm in touch with a lot of them who would have signed this letter. This could be much bigger and should be much bigger than 15 organizations. This Progressive China letter should have had 100 organizations. So maybe it was a time constraint thing. I'm not really sure the politics that goes in. Open letters are always a very political thing, which is why mostly I don't sign on to them personally, although I have signed a couple in the past. But there's something strange going on here because the language in this letter is not inflammatory. It is analytical. It is sensible, almost centristy, and the idea that like you'd have only 15 organizations signing it seems very, very fucking strange to me. And I say that some of the organizations that are involved are my people, Just Foreign Policy, Justice is Global, Peace Action, Roots Action, Quincy Institute, American Friends Service Committee. I'm friendly to places like that, and they're like the leading names, signatories for this letter as institutions. So hopefully, I don't know, you can resend the letter or something and like expand the tent next time. I don't know, but it's all sensible. Reaffirm the status quo, one China policy, strategic ambiguity. At the level of statecraft and geopolitics, that is the best formula that we can come up for sort of like preventing great power war in the near term, right? as we make other moves, new possibilities might open. And like, I think that's where my head is at in a lot of this stuff, the post great power competition stuff. But yeah. So that's where we're at. Well, this went on a little longer than expected, or for me anyway. I hope you guys are doing all right, and I'll catch you real soon.